Okay, so Venerable Jampa and I just returned from Portland, and His Holiness's teachings there, and she'll tell you more about the conference, the Environmental Summit, in the next few days. I wanted to talk, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the session that he had at Maitripa Institute at the graduating ceremony. Because that was a private session, so not everybody came. And it was quite interesting, because they had two people speak before His Holiness. The first one was Dr. Alexander, and I can't remember his first name. I'm sure people could find it. He's a neurologist that went into a coma at one point, and had all these experiences that he said were impossible to have if the mind were the brain, and if, our experiences were governed strictly by the brain. Yeah. And so he wrote a book on it. Does anybody remember the name? It's something about heaven, Proof of Heaven, maybe something like that. And quite interesting. He uses a very Christian vocabulary, or maybe I should put it this way, a theistic vocabulary, to describe his experiences. I wonder if he had been brought up in another faith, if he would have described them in a different way. Yeah. But in any case, it's quite interesting, because he said it just really shook his whole paradigm of thinking that, we are our body and our brain governs everything, and so on and so forth. And he really began to see that there's a lot more that exists besides our physical body and our brain, and there's a lot of other experiences that we can have that we really need to tune into, and that, this is important on a spiritual level and on an ethical level. And so even though speaking about this and writing his book was tantamount to career suicide for a neurologist, because they aren't supposed to talk like this, he said that he had no other choice once he had this experience and saw that the old paradigm was not true. He had to speak out and share what he did, or what he experienced. So he spoke for a few minutes at the beginning about his experience. And then Jose Cabazon, who is a professor of religious studies at UC Santa Barbara, and an old friend of mine, he also spoke, and he talked a little bit about the history of the notion of rebirth, and how it's been, especially in Asian religions, there for a very, very long time. But it's a notion that has evolved over time, that at the beginning it was very much about maybe different parts of our body going back to nature and then recombining in the form of a new life. And then it began to focus with the Vedas and the Brahmins more on the idea of a soul, and then with the Buddhists, of course, the idea that there's no soul and no self, but still rebirth can exist. So he spoke for a while. And then His Holiness spoke. And His Holiness, of course, talked about a wide variety of things. But he did go into quite a discussion about rebirth, and said that there's two ways to approach it. One is by using reasoning, and the other way is through experience. So he said if we use the model of reasoning, then, he referred to Dharmakirti, that everything that exists has both substantial causes and cooperative conditions. And the substantial cause is the thing that actually produce the result but the result is a direct continuation of it. And the cooperative conditions are the other things necessary to make the result come about. So in the case of our body, the substantial cause is the sperm and egg of our parents. In the case of our mind, the substantial cause is a previous moment of clarity and awareness. And then the body acts as a cooperative condition, at the time of conception. He also was saying that during perception, remember in Low Rig we studied the three kinds of causes, the three kinds of conditions. So there's the object, and then the sense organ, and then the immediately preceding moment of mind. So the immediately preceding moment of mind of, let's say, a visual consciousness apprehending blue is a previous moment of clarity and awareness, because that's what becomes the actual, quote, quote, substance of the, of a consciousness that is apprehending blue. But you also need the blue that's the object, and you need the eye organ, or the eye sense power to make that happen. So here the immediately preceding cause is the substantial cause, and the object and the dominant condition, the organ, are the cooperative conditions. So again, he described it there as one moment of clarity and awareness preceding the next moment of clarity and awareness. Okay, so he spoke about that, and then he was saying also the experiential view, that now there's many cases of people who can remember previous rebirths or identify objects from previous rebirths, and this can be corroborated by other people in the lives of people. And here he wasn't referring just to the Tibetan system of identifying incarnations, Jose had said beforehand that actually in ancient India they spoke of, these sages emanating and reappearing again, but there wasn't a specific system for identifying them, and nobody really spoke very, very much about their previous lives. In ancient India, the sages, sometimes they were asked to, but they declined and said that's just a personal matter. Whereas in Tibet, then, it's a new culture, then they started actively identifying people's rebirths, and sometimes these people could describe their previous one, or the articles that they had had in the previous one. So he talked about that as another way for people to maybe think about rebirth, and that could perhaps, the experiential side, that could give them some, lead them into some feeling for the continuity of consciousness. And then, right before he left, one of his last comments right before he left, and Maitripa is a college, okay? Yeah. But His Holiness said a monastery should be a place of learning. Yeah. He was standing right in front of me. I was like in the second row. And he said, a monastery should be a place of learning. So that when people think of monasteries, he said, they don't just think of people chanting puja hour after hour and drinking lots of cups of Tibetan tea, because they serve the tea during the pujas in the Tibetan monasteries. But a monastery should be a place of learning, where people really learn the teachings and have a good, solid foundation and grasp of them. So, I heard that. Not only here, but here. So, thought I would pass that on.